Thank you, Mayor. Great. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. This is, I think, a big day for us in the mayor's office. We have been working on this for some time. It's been consuming as of late as we were getting ready for the conference. But we're really excited to talk to you about what we've discovered. The way we describe it is that we've discovered a new species of city, sort of a species of city that folks haven't described before. We can all think about different kinds of cities, tourist destinations or border towns or metropolises or port cities, post-industrial cities. So all these cities probably share some similar traits with one another. But for Lexington, we wanted to find out more about our city. So it did start with a benchmarking project that the mayor assigned me. I was looking at some data for Lexington, and what I wanted to do was take a look at a wide range of data. Anything I could find that was public. So we were looking at violent crime rates. We were looking at unemployment rates. We were looking at business starts, arts and culture, really education, anything we could find to see sort of what's going on here in Lexington. And it turned out that Lexington was really doing very well, which is nice to see, right? On all these measures. And what it started to look like was a confirmation of what we all know, the folks who are here from Lexington, what we all know is that Lexington is a very cool place. How many people think Lexington is a cool place living here, right? So this confirms, this data sort of confirms that, but it said something else to us. It said that there are other cities that were very similar to Lexington, that were similarly off the charts on all these data sets. And it turns out that all these cities shared this same set of criteria. So they all were former college towns that, as we say, college towns that grew up. So they were between 250,000 and 1 million in terms of their metropolitan area. They all had R1 research universities in the center of the city. It turns out that the cities of similar size that have the university that are just on the outskirts of the city, you don't get this sort of constellation of effects positive effects that I'll be talking about. And the third is that there's a percent of the population that are students that's 10% or above. So if you look at that 3 criteria, it is, as the mayor said, these 6 cities: Ann Arbor, Durham, Chapel Hill, Fort Collins, Lexington, Lincoln, and Madison. And what's been really great about this project is I've started to share some of this with the other cities. And the first mayor I spoke with is Mayor Troxel, who we'll hear from later. And he said, I know. He said, I know all this happens. I've been thinking about it for a long time. He's a mechanical engineering professor at Colorado State University and is now the mayor. So of course he would understand this. Totally makes sense. And so I'm going to do the boring part and talk through a little bit of data. The rest of the day will be data-free, largely. Well, except for Ed Glazer. He's going to have lots of data. Then it'll be largely data-free. And I want to go through, share with you what I found during this benchmarking project, because it really is extraordinary. And it makes you think about Lexington and these university cities in a very different way. These numbers are stark. So this is something you'd expect, right? That with 10% of your population students, you'd expect that your average age would be, mean age would be younger. And you'd expect that you'd have a more highly educated population. So this is the percent of people living in the university cities with bachelor's degrees and above. So it's quite a bit higher, and it turns out that this drives a lot of effects that we'll hear about in just a bit from Professor Ed Glazer and Professor Ken Trusky. Here's one of the findings I thought was really interesting. So Lexington, it did feel like we did not suffer from the Great Recession as greatly as other cities. And that showed up in the numbers. And what it turns out is that all of the university cities grew coming out of the Great Recession at a rate that was nearly as rapid as the largest cities, the largest coastal cities. And certainly much faster than other cities our size. And with that, as we'll hear later, what that does is it shows an adaptability in a city, an ability to innovate. When you go through a correction like that, your economy shifts. We've also done some further research that I'll share after the conference about the ability of university cities to shift their economies during recessions. We've done some research around that funded by the Knight Foundation, and it turns out that universities the data are able to shift their economies in a measurably deeper way through a recession, even though their economies may be smaller than larger metropolitan areas where you assume there'd be a little more play. Certainly lower unemployment. University cities tend to track at least one, often 2 points below the national average in terms of unemployment, and this creates a solidity in the economy. You'd expect that again with a large anchor institution and employer. And full of ideas. So this is a measure, a standard measure of creativity, of business creativity, so patents per thousand. You'd expect that to be much higher in university cities where so much IP is being created. But there's an interesting finding. There's a labor economist at Berkeley named Enrico Moretti, and what he found is that when you have IP, lots of IP in a city, what happens is that companies that aren't even related to that IP tend to be more productive. And this is a theme I think you're going to hear a lot today. There's sort of a magic that happens in university cities, spillover effects, I think is what economists call them, where you have these positive effects, and it's not often a direct. It's not easy to see the direct relationship. So university cities are highly entrepreneurial. So we can look at the number of business starts in a city, and in the university city, the rate of business starts, the rate of entrepreneurship is almost as high as the largest cities in the country. So these are cities that are sort of predisposed to creating new companies and to shifting their economies. This is one of my favorite findings. So look at, in university cities, we can look at the number of arts and cultural institutions per capita. So museums, theaters, fun things, and it turns out that for university cities, the arts and cultural institutions per capita are just much higher than in other cities, even higher than the largest 15 cities. If folks think that in Lexington there's lots to do, this is the data behind that story. And it turns out that university cities have incredibly low violent crime rates. In Lexington, our violent crime rate is among the lowest in the country for any city of our size. And that's true of all the university cities. They tend to have much lower violent crime rates. And a thriving civil society. This is a newer finding. This idea, you can look at nonprofits per capita in a city, so a measure of the civil society and what volunteerism and all the great things we associate with nonprofits, much higher than in the largest cities in the country and in other cities. That creates a richer city. And so with all these effects, it's really no wonder that people are becoming more and more attracted to university cities and are moving to them and wanting to stay after they graduate. And we're seeing that in the numbers too. The university cities are growing at about twice the rate of the nation. People just want to live there, and no wonder. So what does this mean? It means that these university cities, they mirror the largest cities in the country in really important ways, right? They've got lots of talent, lots of entrepreneurship. They have these resilient economies. They have a large nonprofit sector. But unlike the large coastal cities, they're very low cost, very low crime, and low unemployment. So really, if you were thinking about designing a city for the 21st century, it might look something like a university city. Now, we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back too much. We were horrible performers in the 20th century economy. So that's when the economy was geared around manufacturing. It turns out it was, as Louisville knows, it was really important to have a water source, right? A river or a port. Lexington didn't have that, and its population and the other universities, the population growth was not there. But in the 21st century economy, when brains are more important than water sources, I think we can expect the growth to continue happening. And now and you'll see that as these university cities become magnets for talent and investment. One interesting thing, just from my vantage point in the mayor's office, Mayor Gray, big part of his day is sort of allocation of resources in some way. You know, what's the city going to be working on? What are we going to spend our time on? And for other mayors, they're going to have to make much more difficult choices about where to allocate their resources. Do we want to try to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is something we're going to talk about later today? Do we want to try to lower our crime rates? Do we want to build our arts and culture sector and subsidize the arts and culture to make for sort of a richer, more interesting city? A mayor can do that and can maybe be successful with one of those things, but can't be successful in all of those things. And this is the constellation of effects that just naturally happens in university cities. So that's why we think university cities are where the future is happening. So that's my take on the data. And what I want to do for the rest of the day is we're going to explore the idea from a bunch of different angles. So we're going to have mayors talking about their cities and doing a policy swap. We're going to have an expert on universities and how they connect with cities. A panel of practitioners talk about entrepreneurship and innovation. Someone from the Brookings Institution who's going to be talking about innovation districts that are anchored by universities. But before we do all that, we're shortly introduce our keynote speaker. And before I do that, I want to just thank the sponsors of this event. So the Kresge Foundation was the first sponsor of the event, along with the Gaines Center for the Humanities, which is an amazing resource at the University of Kentucky. This is the Lafayette Gaines Seminar for the year. Then there's the Knight Foundation, which has sponsored the conference, and something I'd like to announce right now, they have agreed to offer $10,000 in grants to any researcher, student or professor who wants to choose a topic within the idea of university cities and explore it. There's more information on that at universitycities.org if there's anybody who'd like to apply for that. The deadline's November 14th.